Over to you, sir. So you're on mute. Okay.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's presentation is visible also, and we can hear you.
So, well, friends, that we move on to the second session. That I thought maybe in this session I'll cover how to select a research problem and some examples also, and if possible, that a review of literature that I can go back what I could not cover in the first session. Maybe I would try to kind of supplement. Yeah. Say selection of a problem. So selection of problem actually is in itself a very great problem in research. Somebody said a problem well defined is already half solved. In fact, 80% of the problem of any research for that matter is what problem to kind of select. In fact, if you look at any PhD registration or any kind of even major research project that they do, 50% of the time they're spending on how to select a problem and what is a very ideal problem. But here are some tips as to how you should kind of select a problem. Selection problem in itself actually is a very great problem. And problem rightly selected, please mind you, helps to complete your project on time within the very budgeted, at least amount, and will also boost your morale. So how, at least what you mean by formulation problem is translating and transforming the selected problem into a scientific inquiry. That means there are you, as you at least in your daily walk of life, you see several things across actually in the society, and you'll find that there are certain kind of questions which remain really unanswered. So a research problem need not be an exact problem. It must be a situation which has not been kind of well defined, where there are no answers for a certain phenomenon and so on. According to Kellinger, a problem is an interrogative sentence or a statement that asks what is the relation between two variables, and it also tries to answer these questions. Similarly, that if you look at the other definition, is situation which have no ready successful response. That means when you see something, you're not getting an immediate response about the answers that you really see about a particular habit. It could be about a system, it could be about a phenomenon and so on. You must find out what to do for a solution to a given problem. That means precisely a research problem is an area of either a concern or where there is some kind of a gap in the knowledge base needed for a professional practice. But what ultimately all these definitions are trying to say is that if there is no problem, there is no research. That means if you're trying to kind of rediscover something, it does not become research. Research must be something which answers an unanswered question, or maybe that even if the question is answered, it provides you an answer in a different way. That's what a kind of a problem is. Let us understand how at least selection of a research problem is done. It's one of the most difficult phases, and the choice of a suitable problem, a researcher is compared to an ant actually. Because an ant actually brings a single grain of sand from the ant hill and tries to kind of build some maybe that a nest out of that. So a great discoveries, please mind you, happens not by choice, but sometimes accidentally it happens. By accident it happens, and research, please mind you, are specialists. What's the problem? A question raised for inquiry or it can be a consideration or a solution, an intricate, unsettled question. So what do we do generally when we look at some at least issues unanswered? Sometimes we ignore them, or sometimes we talk about them, discuss about them. Sometimes we try to solve them. So the last part of it, actually, all the three constitute research. So these problems consist of, please mind you, areas of concern, or conditions to be improved, or difficulties to be eliminated, or questions seeking answers. So any research problem can broadly be classified into these categories. One is, it's an area of concern. That there is an area of concern. That means COVID has been increasing. That's an area of concern. What research could we do? Conditions to be improved. In the sense, maybe the environment is going very, very bad. And maybe that environment pollution is the greatest problem today. But how to improve these conditions? So that's again an area of concern. Difficulties to be eliminated. Maybe that there are kind of there is a crunch in the society, for that matter. Maybe in spite of flowing so much of cash by the Reserve Bank of India, yet you find that there is some kind of a cash crunch in the circulation of the currency, for that matter. How this difficulty needs to be kind of addressed and eliminated is another area. It also questions seeking answers. It could be any economic or sociological question or historical question, seeking at least answers. That means whether a particular government, for instance, a political science, you are trying to understand whether that a particular party is better, or X party is better, Y party is better as far as the performance of the government is concerned. So the question seeking answers. So examples of research problem, how do we see, this is some of the very simple problems. How do we retain our talented employees in a company? A company's problem is maybe the attrition rate is very, very high. How do we retain this talented employees in a concern is a problem that can be researched by a company. Or how do we compete with foreign universities? For an education institution, its problem is how to compete with foreign universities in order to attract good and quality students. Or maybe another at least problem is, what is the best media to communicate with our students? An education institutions wants to kind of find out what is the best possible communicating media for the students. Does career and skill oriented education prevent students from dropping out? Maybe as college is faced with the problem of dropout of students, and it is trying to understand whether a career orientation through skill development can be a solution. So like this, anything can be a problem. Take this one example about what is a problem and what is a perceived problem, what is the actual problem. See, there was a 20-year-old swimming pool. This swimming pool has been in existence for the last 20 years. And the membership for this swimming pool has been declining day by day, day by day. Maybe that the membership for this swimming pool is declining. At the same time, a new water park has come up in the neighborhood. A new water park has come up, and residents prefer this expensive water park. Although there is already a swimming pool, these residents are preferring a water park which has come up now, which has so many other facilities too. And it's also expensive at the same time, but they prefer that. And at the same time, another at least clue that we have is demographic changes are taking place. That means younger people are becoming older, and children in this particular area have grown up. Please look at the diagnosis. It says an organization is a 20-year-old swimming pool. In spite of that, the membership has been declining instead of increasing. And at the same time, a new water pool has come up, and another demographic change is people are becoming older, and ultimately the symptomatic problem is that people prefer at least a new water park to that of an old swimming pool. But please mind you, the true problem when you research, it came to light that the demographic changes, that is children in this 20-year-old neighborhood have grown up. they're becoming older, and older residents no longer swim anywhere, whether it's in a new water park or in the existing. So the actual, at least, problem is that people are becoming older, and these older generation are not going to the swimming pool or to the neighborhood, the water park, and therefore it's declining. But your assumption, please mind you, was that new water park is coming. That's the reason why that no, you're not getting the membership. So you find that like this, when you're trying to identify a problem, you must do some preliminary research to define a problem itself. Without any kind of pilot, at least research, you would have at least concluded that the problem is that this water park has so many other facilities. That's the reason why people are moving to that water park instead of this swimming pool. But the reality is this. So, but how do you identify the problem? That is, what are the ways and means or sources of identifying a problem? There are different sources by which you can identify the problem. By reading some very, at least, good books, maybe very original authored books. If you go through those concepts, somewhere you find that, yes, this concept, you have something read on blockchain technology, you read something on cryptocurrency, or maybe that you have spoken something on machine learning or artificial intelligence. These are the things that are coming up today. But that impresses you as to how this cryptocurrency works and what are the kind of ways by which people can get cheated even under this system. We want to do some research on that. So reading books or magazines. Magazines give you the latest articles. By going through those latest articles also, you may identify some area of interest you want to research on. Maybe during a lecture or a discussion also, some maybe issues may come out that you may convert that into a research problem. Or even by asking questions every day about some phenomenon that's happening in the society as to why the younger generation probably do not kind of respect the elderly as to how we used to do in our own younger days. So that's ask a question for yourself that you want to do some research on that. Daily experience. What, why, that if somebody said, Lewis Allen, who is an authority on management, said, when I'm in confusion, I employ 6 honest serving men and they teach me all that I know. With that, my problem is solved. And the names are what, where, why, when, how, and who. So if you ask these questions, certainly that you'll be able to kind of come out with a research problem. Or a field study or an internship, as you're doing some internship in a company or you're doing some project in a company, through observation also, maybe you find that there's a very great attrition in a particular company where you're working. If that interests you, what are the reasons? Whether it's because of the leadership style or it's because of other issues, compensation issues, that is, you to get interested in that. Maybe by working on some projects with other researchers also, you try to get some idea as to how you can kind of go about to kind of doing research, or even brainstorming. Maybe if you want to make things very simpler, you can at least some area of concern that you can put it for some discussion among your own students. They come out with very kind of creative ideas, so you will arrive at some kind of a research problem too, or new ideas to solve a problem. Or you read some research reports, some thesis and so on. That's also a kind of source of identifying a problem. Or maybe your intuition tells you, sixth sense or insight, or maybe some feeling that this could be the possibility of a problem. You try to kind of explore that. And maybe that you're dissatisfied with certain phenomenon or certain behavior or certain kind of procedure or some kind of a policy that really leads to research. And look for current developments. That is, if you're going through the internet, some newspapers, magazines, and latest articles and so on. If you even go to Google search and say, what are the current developments in your own field? You want to do some maybe research in some area like philosophy. So what are the current developments actually in philosophy? You get a lot of articles on that or some certain issues and variables on that. You can try working on that. Or maybe that dairy reference, if you look at the dairy of some maybe top individuals who have really made some difference in life, you can look at maybe those also issues become your research problem. Locating the problem in a firm or in a classroom, as you're even sitting in a classroom or maybe handling some session, some idea that strikes you. or some question asked by some, at least, a participant in a conference may lead to some researchable question for me. It could be possible. Community own teaching experiences also, seminars, workshops, and other, at least, maybe that places you can also identify certain problems. A seminar themes itself, when you look at the sub themes and themes of a seminar or a conference, that gives you some ideas to develop that research problem. Or with fellow participants, or discussion with your own professors, or special assignments, term papers, consultation with your own guide, or maybe some advisor, or if you meet some policy makers and ask them what are the policy issues and problems that you can identify for research, they can also give you some inputs. Or faculty members, you have some discussions in some academic meetings, you can experts in the field, researchers, administrators, or if you met some press people also, the TV media and others, they're also out actually in the field every day, seeing many problems of the society. They can also kind of give you some inputs. Or you see some movies as a central theme of the movies or sub themes of the movies, you may convert into a research problem. Some of them you may see even in dreams for that matter. So that can also become a part of your problem. So what should you do? Actually involve yourself very seriously in the refinement of the problem. And first, actually, as soon as you get some idea, what probably you should do is you should collect the related literature on that. As soon as you really see that there's some kind of, I told you that some cryptocurrency which has come up today. You want to do some research on that. Pick up all the articles, papers that are available on this cryptocurrency and see that how we can refine that into a researchable problem. You want to address the security issues of a cryptocurrency. So you can work on that, the security issues of cryptocurrency. Or maybe that you want to work on blockchain. How effective is blockchain for working the cryptocurrency for that matter? So whatever issue that you really look at, immediately you try to refine that and go through the literature of that at least particular issue and narrow the focus. It's a very wide area. So that if you try to kind of narrow down on certain issues, then it becomes much simpler. Maybe that you want to kind of understand the causes for a fluctuation in the global currencies. If you say only global currency fluctuation, becomes a very broader one. Maybe you want to compare between, for instance, dollar and maybe the euros, or maybe that between any of the two currencies for that matter. So you try to kind of narrow the scope of the study. Then you should also kind of understand with reference to a population that you want to study. That means whether you go to study about the male population or female population or even geographical population, whether that you want to make a study in a particular region or a particular country or a particular place or whatever. So the population for the study you need to kind of define when you narrow down the focus. Then when you really have the population in mind, whether your population is customers, whether it's employees, whether it's organizations, whatever, that you should kind of decide about the population. Then situation, time, and condition. That is, you want to refer that to a particular situation. Maybe that you want to study the decline in kind of entrepreneurship. The situation is the COVID situation, or maybe time frame in mind is over a period of 3 years, or a particular condition. Maybe conditions kind of surrounding a certain situation. You deal with it, that population, then situation, then time, then conditions, then subject availability. That means whether data is available on this particular problem, that must also be kind of carefully studied, because if you don't get adequate material on this, then even to research this problem becomes very difficult for you as a beginner. And are you ready with the equipment that you want to address this problem? Maybe you want to do well on blockchain technology itself, but do you have adequate knowledge of working of computers, the software, the hardware, and other things, and then maybe the related literature? Or you have the competency on that? Or let us say that you want to kind of take up a research problem on queuing technique. Are you familiar with the operations research? Are you good in mathematics? So researchers' readiness And ability is also another question that you must address. Then, whether adequate resources are available, both financial resources, whether infrastructure resources are available, and whether you will get the data adequately is another question. And whether measurement tools are available, whether that adequate models are already in existence to test some kind of maybe phenomenon, or if measurements are not available, you should be able to kind of develop. Do you have the competency to develop is another issue. And what are the issues to be dealt with? And setting the scope of the problem. So you must define the geographical scope and also the functional scope. Generally, what happens that a good research problem is denoted by this acronym FINER maps, which means feasible, interesting, novel, and so on. So it must be a very feasible proposition. It must also be very interesting. If it's a very dull affair, you may lose interest out of that. It must be kind of exciting for you to do that research. So choose such an area with which you are interesting and novel. If you're going to do some, as a businessman student, you're going to do some research on working capital management and all that, which are outdated, or some training issues and so on, there's no problem. So you must kind of do something which is up to date, on which there's no research has been done. The other day that I was kind of scrutinizing some research proposals, I saw some, maybe the title on rural, urban and rural entrepreneurship. A lot of studies are done, for instance, on rural entrepreneurship. What new angle that you're going to give is what is important. So you should make it novel. You're going to do something on female startups. Yes, there is some kind of a novelty in that. If you're going to say rural entrepreneurship, then again, that it doesn't sound very novel. And also on ethical issues. So don't try to kind of do some research on maybe unethical products such as some maybe alcohol, some cigarettes, and such other issues which are not ethical issues. So such ethical issues are also involved. So you must look at that and whether it's relevant. But somebody was doing a study on a study, for a PhD topic, they were doing something on a study of attrition. A study of attrition in a software company, but by the time that lady took up that research, there's not a problem of attrition, there's a problem of downsizing. The organization itself wanted to get rid of people, it's the people leaving the organization. So it does not become relevant at that point of time. So when you choose a problem, you must ensure that problem is alive at least for certain time until you at least complete your research topic and submit the report. It's not going to be relevant. For instance, you want to make a study on COVID. COVID will last for another 1 year or so. And after 3 years of your research, if you kind of produce a report which becomes very not relevant at that point of time, it is not actually good for the problem. And it should be manageable. And so if you take up a very large sample size and a very big research problem involving, let's say that comparison between trade between India and maybe some other European country and so on, how do you collect the data? Will you go there and if you want, let's say, collect primary data, will you all the way go to UK and then you have the adequate finances permission to collect the data? So it should be manageable and it should be appropriate too. And it should have the potential value. Your research must have potential value even in terms of maybe some commercial value also where you're going to gain out of that, or whether you also kind of even in your own career and academics where you're going to grow, that must also be considered. And publishability. So another issue is the publishability is another issue, whether that this article could be published and whether you also kind of get credits out of it, and also it will be useful to the general people as a result of reading such article must also be seen. It should be systematic, researchable, and it must be significant. So what are the types actually? So there are different types of problems. Maybe problem in existence. That means this problem already exists, but you're adding a new angle to the at least the research. Let's say poverty is already there. Poverty is an issue which is already there for years together. But what new thing you're going to add as a result of poverty? That are you going to kind of relate maybe that an entrepreneurship to poverty, or are you going to at least add any other new ways and means of maybe providing some career through skill development to the kind of this population and improve their at least income levels and so on. So a poverty issue can be studied from a different angle, not from the same angle. So then is an existing problem studied in a new pattern. For instance, that education, of course, educational issues are already, a lot of research has already done, but you want to, let us say, study in the context of NEP, new education policy, then that's an existing one again. Then description and classification. So this type of problem only describes why a phenomenon at least occurs, or it classifies maybe a problem into certain kind of maybe that different facets. Then composition, that means there are bits and pieces of research in different parts in different but a particular phenomenon, but you want to kind of assemble it and bring it together. Maybe economic development is one issue which is affected by different parameters such as employment, income, and maybe trade and policy issues and so on. All of them you want to bring it together and compose them into one problem and arrive at certain solutions. It becomes holistic problem. Or it can be a problem which establishes the relationship between two variables. Maybe what is the relationship between kind of maybe that employment and economic development. So two kind of variables that you want to kind of compare. That becomes a relationship study. Then description, it's descriptive is nothing but the description itself. Or a causality, that means what causes a particular phenomenon. There's a causality study. And a casuality is that maybe that something happens all of a sudden and you want to kind of address that issue, take up that as a casualty. So how to develop a research problem is a very great problem. So begin by identifying a broader subject. What you have to do is, for instance, you're a business management kind of teacher, you want to do research. So management is a very broader area. Then you classify them into, again, there is again sub-functions. What are you interested in management? Whether you're interested in marketing, whether you're interested in finance, or HR, or operations, or communications, or a behavioral at least aspect. So first, divide your broader subject into kind of classified subjects or functional areas. Well, you have chosen, let us say, marketing as your area. Again, in marketing, again, there are different at least sub-classifications or sub-functions like product, price, place, promotion, people, and so on. So again, there are sub-classifications. Let us say that you identified product as your area in marketing. Even in product, there is different, again, elements of product. Product diversification, product failure, product enrichment, and all kinds of packing, packaging, and variety of at least product related, product life cycle and product development and so on. So what you want to study in the product area like this, even in your own subject, come down to at least from broader subject, come down to the minute aspect of what you really like in that particular field, and then becomes and identify that with maybe that the institution or a company or some kind of system or some kind of an institution to say, for instance, you identified product as maybe your area, product failure as your sub area. That related to, let us say, automotive, you want to make a study of product failure in automobile industry. So you're relating it to a company or an institution. More so, even in the case of, for instance, psychology, that you want to do a research on the area of psychology. So there are different aspects of psychology. Maybe you have behavioral patterns, leadership styles, communication, and n number of at least things you have. Motivation, you have n number of things. Even in motivation, again, that minute aspect of motivation that you want to study on and relate it to a particular, let's say, company. Maybe that a study of leadership styles and its impact on motivation of employees. This psychological study that you want to study. So like this, from broader area, narrow down to sub area, then minute area, and then related to the problem in question in a society, that becomes a research problem. Then, what is the impact of, at least the next thing is that you need to, once you have at least looked at that the research problem, then the next thing is, once you identify the research problem, you have to develop some research questions. So what happens from a literature survey, you are identifying a research gap. That research gap again becomes your statement of problem, and from statement of problem, you are at least doing the objectives. From again objectives, you have to at least arrive at the research question. A problem statement is split into objectives. Objectives are again split into research questions. research questions are split into research variables. Research variables are converted into, again, that research questions for your data collection. And then from data collection, again, you'll achieve the objectives. So here, research questions, how do you kind of develop these research questions from the objectives is, begin first identify the broader subject, that is your statement of problem. And also look at your preliminary research on these, whatever that your survey of literature will give you some preliminary research. And what you still need to know is what are the kind of narrow the scope and focus. That is, try to narrow the scope of your problem in terms of geography, in terms of the population, in terms of the gender, in terms of an institution, in terms of the income level, through some criteria that you try to reduce the scope and focus of the study. Then, if the research problem is clear with so much of research, so research problem must be very focused. So it should focus on the objectives, and is actually research. You should also ask a question where it's becoming very complex, then try to kind of narrow down the scope. Is of interest to the researcher, whether that you have interest in kind of addressing those issues as a part of your research is one question. So if you're not interested, then that it becomes a problem to kind of work on that. Then is it a researchable research problem actually that you need to really look at, whether it's measurable and it's too broad or narrow, understand the implications of your research too. Then also kind of try to brainstorm. There is a uniqueness in the area also. It must be a particular question. Is there any particular question? Bring to narrow the topic and evaluate these questions, at least in reference to your objectives, your problem statement, your scope of study. Ensure that this question covers all these issues, and only then you have to finalize the research questions. And whether you can develop a hypothesis for these research questions, please mind you are converted into hypothesis. So ensure whether you are able to develop a hypothesis out of these research questions. And write down your research questions also on the statement question in your own words, and write the research problem as completely as possible. So and stick to what will be studied, and name the variables also. Once you have developed the research questions, please mind you, these research questions are kind of translated into research variables. Again, so cut down on at least the unwanted things, and then it becomes research variables in order. And avoid the words significant and prove and all this, as per the research questions. When you're framing the research questions, don't use generally these terms, because to quantify it becomes very difficult. Then avoid using two different terms to refer to the same variable. So because your terminology must be very unique, so that where the definition of concept comes into play. You must define each variable very clearly so that there's no overlapping of the meaning of these variables, and see whether it is feasible, and whether it's hazardous or dangerous, whether it's ambiguous, you should also check, and whether it is contemporary, whether it is modern, at least, our question becomes outdated question. So, well, so that, how do you define a research question is, a question aims to answer, often addresses an issue or a problem or a phenomenon in question. So what are the important points while at least looking at it is, involves a continuous updating one's knowledge on the topic and refining the ideas. And you must remain updated in order to arrive at these questions, because you should ask such questions which are most relevant to the contemporary needs. If it becomes too outdated, where with the research is already done, such research questions must not be included. Ask so that they ask on the current trends, on the state of art research, and maybe on technological innovation. You can, research questions can address technology related issues to that particular problem. And it can also kind of address policy issues related to that at least phenomenon, and make research questions specific and concise. Let it be very crisp. If it's a very long question, you will not be able to kind of really that understand and get the kind of data required, and also understand the repercussions and implications of such research questions on the problem itself, and ensure that clarity. And doing a literature survey will also help you to arrive at certain questions. So let us, these are some examples of research question. So this is related to That is, when does children work become child labor? So it's some study related to child labor itself. These are some questions actually related to this child labor. When does children work become child labor? Where is it a problem? In which sectors of economy does it exist? How many children are involved in child labor? Why does it exist? What is the International Labour Organization doing to combat this child labor? See, these are the typical questions about the study on child labor. A study of causes for child labor is the topic. These are the related questions. So this is how a problem, the statement of problem is that there has been a kind of child labor as a result of which children are not going to the schools and the colleges to study and their career is being affected. That's the problem statement for which actually you have these are the research questions. They're derived into objectives, objectives into questions. So I'll go back to the literature survey. How do you do the literature survey so that you once again? I'll show you some at least problems. These are some of the a lot of at least maybe issues on which you can kind of look at doing research. I will leave this with organizers and you can have a look at that. These are all management related, but I'll also show you some on maybe psychology, sociology, and other history related. One second. One second. So we'll also know little on how to kind of do the literature survey.
Sir, excuse me, we are not able to see your presentation.
Not able to.
If you are sharing, yeah.
Are you able to see now? Hello? Are you able to see now?
Yes, sir. Yes,
yes,
sir.
sir.
Yeah.
You can
visible.
see that.
So we'll know, at least know little about how to do the literature survey, because literature survey is one of the most important thing in research, because when you identified a problem, please mind you, unless there is a research gap, you can't do any research on a particular phenomenon or a particular function or a particular, at least, issue related to research. So how do you do the literature survey? A literature survey it's a gradual process by which a researcher uses various at least sources of information in order to identify the gaps available. So these are, you need to familiarize yourself with whatever the theoretical construct. For instance, that you're going to kind of make a study of causes for unemployment maybe in the country as an economics topic. So you must read all the related literature with reference to employment, policy issues, and maybe industry background, various other issues. So you must kind of study and establish a gap. So how do you kind of, previous researchers like to present study? So why do you have to do the literature survey is, you need to know what is already gone by in your own area and what is left to be done. Yeah, that's the starting point of research. Once you have chosen some kind of a problem that you want to kind of interest you, you must look at what are all the kind of current, at least from past so far, what is the research that has gone by and where are the gaps and what others have done in the areas that are very similar, though not necessarily identical, one's own area of investigation, and also see that a thoughtful thematic review of historical, theoretical, it can be methodological. So please mind you, a research gap can be some kind of very historical, it can be theoretical, it can be kind of even methodological issues where there's going to be a difference actually in the research that you are going to conduct and others are going to conduct. So it can be the review of literature, please mind you, can be conducted on objective wise. If you have a particular specific objective, all the literature related to that objective can be kind of done, or it can be on the basis of the research question that you have drafted, you can do the literature survey, or on the basis of the hypothesis that you have at least stated, you can do the literature survey, or on the very problem, statement of problem itself, you can establish the research gaps. So what are the different types of research, at least review of literature is? It can be integrative. That means drawing conclusions from many studies. You will arrive at some kind of a theory, and maybe on the present theories to explain some kind of phenomenon, or to maybe comparing the width, breadth, length of maybe that on the particular phenomenon, or maybe the occurrence of the phenomenon, or maybe it can be on the basis of different methodology. That means maybe somebody has already conducted study, he has used the observation method, but you want to use a survey method in order to fine tune it. So what is the importance of review of literature is, it reveals the various sources of data. But if you want to know the different sources of data, if you review the literature, while reviewing the literature, you know that what books are available, what the journals are available, what articles are available, all this. And you will maybe that it introduces to even eminent scholars who you can go and meet them, and maybe that as a result of their maybe scholarly articles, you find that there is something more that you want to know. You can meet those scholars also, discuss with them. It increases your confidence. Once you master what is already literature available and the study, it also increases your confidence level, and it reveals various investigations similar to yours. If somebody else is already doing a research on that, you will come to know, so that you don't have to kind of go. At least if you go to the depository of the UGC, it gives you all the different research which is already carried out, so that yours will not be a duplication, because if there is a duplication, such thesis may not be accepted. So therefore, you have to ensure that you are not duplicating or doing the same thing or reinventing the wheel. So it also gives you how others are handled these issues by different methodology, or maybe using a different scaling technique or whatever. And even design issues, you will know, you can also avoid, at least, you can also, so its own area of summary, and it can, you will also know that the methodological issues, and also avoid unnecessary duplication. You will also summarize the results also possible, and it gives you an overview of the entire field and prevailing at least ideas fit into your study and how the study agrees or differs. So it also gives you an opportunity to see whether your study agrees with what ideas the others have already given, or whether it's going to be too different. It may reveal the data sources also and other methods dealing with that. What is the review literature process is like this. First, you identify the key issues to be addressed. If you already have a problem in at least hand, so this problem you must really look at what are the issues to be addressed about this particular problem. So clarify the research topic and a relationship between the different variables that you want to know, or be specific on the problem. Literature should address and identify the sources of information, the books, articles, and other things that you need, and analyze critically the articles identified and create an outline out of the review, and write a review of literature using objectives. So keeping each objective in mind, you must be able to kind of write the review of literature. Then you must ask the following questions. What contains claims and arguments are being made? Are the arguments logical? What evidence is cited in support? So these issues at least now you will confront with. Let me, once again, I'll show you some practical as to how you should review the literature. See, these are the primary sources of kind of looking at literature, and the maybe that you will contact maybe some eyewitnesses related to that phenomenon, or maybe the original work carried out by that particular person, or maybe that some periodicals where it is such a original article is published. And the secondary sources are, you have reports, you have newspapers, print journals, online computers, and so on. And abstracting the references, so read that. So how to kind of source the kind of reference is abstract that you prepare about this review of literature. That first read the article or abstract. And please mind you, skim the entire article. You don't have to reproduce all the kind of the entire article as a result of your review of literature. You should do what is called a skim reading. Just glance and see what contains in this article. Take that and put it in the review of literature chapter in your record. Record complete bibliographical. Take the author's title of the at least an article, name of that particular article, author, the publisher, and also the kind of the year when it is published, and also the summary of this article must be noted. And also that the how do you kind of place this literature review in your as a part of your report is first a little introduction, theoretical review, conceptual frame, and actual review. In about half a page, what happens in the review of literature chapter, the second chapter that I was talking about in a report. First chapter of any report contains introduction and about the theoretical framework. In the second chapter, you're going to give the review of all the 100 odd articles that you've studied. Further, there's a structure. You'll give a little introduction about this article. With that, first thing is the name and year of the article or the author. All these three things are mentioned, and little introduction. The theoretical review, that is what objectives that author had in mind. What is the kind of findings of this particular article? About half a page, each article is kind of shown as a review of literature in the thesis. And it's also important to kind of find the source of this, at least you should use either a APA, that's American Psychological Association format, or a maybe that maybe that Modern Language Association format. One of them, this is the way you format it. In the case of citation, how do you have to kind of show this is the author, the year, the title, the publisher, and so on. And citation referencing, this is the way you've done. One second, I'll show you how it is reviewed. One second. See, for instance, so this is the way you're going to show the review of literature in your thesis. First, you're citing the author's name, the title of the study, the year of the publication, and briefly about this particular article. It focuses on how change of human characteristics will affect the ability to avoid conflict. So about 100 such articles you're going to kind of review and put it actually as a part of your review. So this is the second article that needs review. David is the author in his study, Minimizing Conflict. The title of study attempts to study the amount of knowledge regarding work. So very briefly. So in the second chapter, review of literature, please take all those 100 articles, put one by one, about in half a page each one. You start with a little introduction to the chapter, saying that now for the purpose of our study, we have identified the problem, we have reviewed all the literature regarding this, and we would like to review each one of them and then start reviewing each one of them, 1, 2, and 3. That's the way you're going to research. And how do you establish? So once you have identified the literature, reviewed the literature, please mind you should be able to establish a research gap. How are you going to kind of address the research gap is, so you must read the first article and all the articles. Once you finish reading all the articles and reviewing all the articles, then you have to identify what are the research gaps available. It's a question, a problem. How do you, for example, impact of the psychology of corporate employees during the post-COVID, maybe impact of television. Say, so in a gap is what is not geographically covered is one gap. Maybe what is not functionally covered can be another gap. For instance, if a few gender specific studies. You can say that this study covers only a male gender, female gender is not covered. Or maybe it's for certain function. For instance, maybe that in a poverty study, you may say that this study does not cover educational issues of a particular section of the population. Or maybe it does not cover the income group of a particular, at least, status. Or maybe it does not cover some education status of individuals. So what a study does not cover actually becomes a research gap that you need to kind of identify. So these are the research gaps actually you can look at. What is missing or insufficient information? If a particular information is insufficient, that can be covered. Or gap that limits the ability of decision makers. So research gap exists due to a question. Actually, some issues are not addressed in this particular study. That needs to be kind of addressed as a research gap. Or a certain population is not considered. That should be addressed as a research gap. So please mind you, a research gap can exist in different forms. So you must be able to it can be an empirical gap. That means maybe if there is no empirical gap, means there is no evidence. There is no kind of previous studies which are already done on this particular issue. So that can be a research gap. Maybe you want to take up, as I told you, something on machine learning. You're doing a study on machine learning, but the research gap is that there are no studies at all. There is no previous studies on this cryptocurrency. That becomes an empirical gap. Or knowledge gap. Maybe that there are already studies which are already made on maybe that cryptocurrency, but that there are certain issues which are still not addressed, in the sense that maybe security issues is not addressed in this particular study. So it becomes a knowledge gap. Or evidence gap is, although people have made some studies, they have not given any kind of an evidence regarding it. Maybe during COVID, they may say that a vaccine will cure, at least 2 doses of vaccine will cure. But there are no studies which will prove that there are 2 doses is sufficient enough to kind of withstand or maybe protect yourself from the COVID. So that's again an evidence gap. Or there are no theories to prove that. This is a theoretical gap. Or maybe some population gap. A certain section of population not covered in the study, it becomes a population gap. Application or implementation gap. Or maybe that this particular theory is not applied and the results are yet to be seen. So you want to conduct a pilot study, that becomes a application gap. Or maybe in this study, they've used observation as a method, but you want to go for a survey method. That's a methodology gap. So you find that you have to mention all these kind of gaps in our research study. Once you review the literature, see in the literature whether there is an empirical gap. That means there are no studies at all in this particular area. State that. This for this particular gap, you find that there is an empirical gap as there are no other studies conducted in this area. Knowledge gap, although that there are studies conducted in this area, certain issues are not addressed, so there is no knowledge about these particular facts. That becomes a knowledge gap. Put evidence gap. That means say that all the studies are conducted, there is no evidence to prove that these results are accurate. That's the evidence gap. Theoretical gap is there's no theories or models to kind of apply for this particular situation and try and understand the phenomenon. So that becomes a theoretical gap. Or a certain population. This study covers only a male gender, does not cover female gender. That's a population gap. Application or implementation gap. So although that this maybe the results of the study have come out, but this is not tried and applied to a certain situation. So that becomes a implementation gap. Or methodology gap is this study is maybe heavily relies on a survey, but it does not use some focus group methodology where experts could be kind of consulted and their opinion could be sought. That becomes a methodology gap. So all these gaps in your research study, is better to put all these gaps so that it becomes very clear these are the gaps that you want to address as a part of your research. So if you want to know what is the difference between a topic, problem, purpose, and research questions. See, this is one of the distance learning problems. So the topic is distance learning, and research problem is lack of students in distance learning classes. That means the research problem is The students have not been attending these online classes or distance learning classes. And the purpose of this study is to study why students do not attend these, at least no online classes. That's the purpose of the study. The research question is, does the use of online technology in classrooms have prevented students from enrolling and attending the classes? This is the research question. So you can just see that what is the difference between a topic, between a problem, between the purpose of study, between the research question. One is topic is distance learning. The problem is people are not attending these online classes in the distance learning mode. The purpose is why students are not attending these online classes. The research question is it because this maybe that no web technology is not very simple for them to understand, they have not been attending the classes. So this becomes it's very clear. What is the problem? What is the purpose? What is the research question? See, how do you kind of know that if you want to know the difference between the statement of a problem, the research questions and purposes and deficiencies. See, look at this. The topic is distance education. Here, the point is basically the introduction to this topic is that the distance online education has been rapidly growing due to several reasons. And please mind you, this distance education is a very low cost and very effective method, in spite of experts suggesting this. And the research problem is here. Although that experts suggest this is a low cost method of really educating these thousands of people, but you find that in these classes, the research problem is the attendance is very, very low. In spite of the best efforts, best faculty, you find that there is a lack of interest among students. So the next one is that, so here, why actually that the purpose of the study is insistent is that a lot of, at least also in web conferencing, a significant factor in effectiveness of the class. Because experts have found that this is the most effective method of reaching at least thousands of people and effectively imparting knowledge. The research has shown that this is the most effective method. But deficiencies in the evidence. More studies are needed to explore. See, there is a research gap. Although that research shows that this is the most effective method of really that maybe reaching thousands of students, still people are not attending these classes, means there is some research gap. More such studies are needed to explore the students' perception towards online learning. So you find that there is one problem is how we can reach people, mass education of people. That's the one thing. And so they have found out that this online learning is the best method through some research. But in practice, the practical gap, I was talking about application gap. Application gap is when they applied this, you still find that there's a very poor attendance. And as a result of this research gap, you find that more number of studies, this is justification for your research again. More studies are needed to explore what is the student perception towards these learning experiences, whether it is because of the online, because of the technology, a number of gaps you can find. There's a technology gap, or whether it's a population gap, or whether it's a age gap, a number of gaps you can at least establish through this primary study. And so who are going to be the audience of your study, that in case you want to take up this study? You find that the college and university administrators are going to be the target audience for whom this research is going to kind of benefit, because once they get some solution, they'll be able to address how we can kind of go for the mass education. What is the purpose of this study? The purpose is to explore absenteeism from non-mandatory. What is the causes of this absenteeism is the purpose of the study. So what are the research questions? The research questions are these. What are the students' attitudes regarding online classes? What are the students' attitude towards online classes? Second question is, what are the students' reasons for attending these? There are few students who are attending. What is the reason why they're attending? There are many students who are not attending. What is the reason for not attending these classes is another research question. Last research question is, so take what would motivate the students to increase attendance in these online classes? What could be done? What should be the strategy? See, these are the research questions. You know, I think I'm sure it should be very clear to when I go back. Problem statement is that so student attendance on online classes is dwindling. That's the main statement of the problem. Then the background is that the other researchers have done a lot of studies and found online learning to be most effective method as compared to any other method. But the deficiencies in the evidence is, there is a research gap in the present study is that more studies are required because in spite of the research findings that's the most effective, people have been absenting themselves. So there is more studies are required in order to do, at least ensure why these online classes are not effective. Audience, as told you, both college, university, administrators, and faculty are the audience who will benefit from this study. The purpose is to explore absenteeism from learning environments. Is there any other, at least, method which is most effective and why people are not really kind of able to attend these classes? Again, questions are maybe focused on their attitudes. What is their attitude towards online classes? Why they're attending, why they're not attending, and what is the strategy? I'm sure that now with this, it should be very clear to as to how you can kind of look at what is the problem, what is the question, and so on. So having at least gone through this, now we should be able to identify. A statement of problem states the existing state of affair. We saw that. The existing state of affair is that the existing state of affair is that online classes is found to be the most effective method of attending, at least spreading mass education. That's the existing state of affair. What is the states? What is the problem issue? In a statement problem, you must state this also. So what you should state is what is the problem in question. The problem in question is people are not attending the online classes. That is the problem statement. Then reasons for undertaking this study. Why the reason for taking or the purpose of the study is to understand why people are not attending these at least classes online in spite of research findings that is most effective. And explains why the study is necessary. The study is necessary because you have to evolve a better strategy not to read the mass education. That's the necessary. And explains the benefit to the intended sponsors. Who are going to benefit? Faculty, colleges, college administrators, faculty, management, all those will benefit. So in any statement of problem, please mind you, all these features must be invariably be present, only then it becomes a good problem statement. So I'm just giving you this. I already given you some statement of problem that about the South Indian Bank and others. So these are the objectives that I already kind of showed you that how it should be made measurable. All these issues that I already covered with this. Let me show you some topics which maybe that you can work on in other areas also, that I've only given you some business examples. For instance, these are all, of course, there are over more than 300 studies on commerce and management. So it's in that area of my interest. I've shown that many. But for instance, some examples of in economics, what can be studied. So if you want to study the impact of poverty and economic growth, case of, for instance, BRIC countries, where you can at least make some comparison of these countries and look at what are the kind of causes and consequences of poverty at these countries. Or understanding educational progression at local level, a comparison of north and south cities in India. That is, you want to study the education status in these two countries, or you want to analyze the effect of employment on GDP. Maybe that you want to make a comparison of these Asian countries as to how unemployment is going to affect the GDP of the country. Or maybe that you want to work on some history related projects, that you can make some kind of a comparison between that, different civilizations that built the Indian nation, that what are the contributions of different civilizations that built the Indian nation. Or you want to make a study on the evolution of Indian history and religion through the years, how at least the evolution of different religions and their contribution to the kind of maybe the country and society, or an in-depth study on the different dynasties throughout the history and their contribution to the development of the country. What are their contributions? What their misgivings also, maybe even that can also be kind of studied as a part of your history. So maybe some studies on political science, you want to make a study on behavioral approach to comparison of performance of political parties. It's a performance appraisal of different political parties over a period of time since independence, who all have ruled and what are their contributions and what are their marketing strategies, what is the maybe attitude of maybe voters towards such political parties, maybe a marketing strategy of political parties that can be studied, and it can be studied as a part of your political science, yeah. Or maybe foreign policies of two different countries, United States and United Kingdom, and their impact on economic development, or maybe in maintaining the peace in that particular region, or presidential versus parliamentary democracy for India. Whether we have a parliamentary system now, whether we can move on to at least a presidential system, maybe a feasibility study can be conducted. It's going to be a very interesting study. Or cultural pressure between United States and Japan. So what are the cultural differences and pressures between these two countries? Or maybe a Soviet Union ideology, especially this can be studied with reference to the present Ukraine war. What is their ideology and why they're fighting the war? How it could have been avoided? That can be studied. Or maybe that you want to at least make maybe that you want to make some studies on sociology for that matter. So maybe something on the long-term impact of some cultural appropriations, or you want to make a study in impact of media on human behavior and attitude, or you want to make a study on key social justice issues impacting society, or you want to make a study on factors contributing to the extreme polarization in society, a number of sociological studies. Or for instance, you want to make a study on psychological, at least psychology related issues. So how disabled women view their image interactions with other opposite, at least gender, in terms of their own image of the personality or whatever. Or how does religion modify social responses between men and women? Are they different? Are they the same? A qualitative research can be conducted on that. Or impact of leadership styles on organizational performance. However, there are different types of leadership, such as free reign, autocratic, and whatever. Maybe through the managerial grid also, that the Mount Blake's managerial grid can be with reference to that. You can study the organizational performance. So any number, or you want to study something on philosophy itself. Maybe that to make a comparison between that, maybe the modern philosophy and maybe the traditional philosophy, or maybe that beliefs of certain individuals, or maybe impact of maybe the philosophy on the maybe well-being of society, or maybe philosophy education itself and its impact on the behavior of individuals. A number of at least the issues can be kind of addressed. So, but however, in commerce and management, there are so many other topics which I already showed you that there are a number of topics you can work on. I have classified them in marketing, management, and other into various other at least sectors. You can have a at least look at that on finance. Marketing, you can cover on these some of the issues on consumer behavior, consumer perception, company advantage, quality perception, market potential, customer satisfaction, market analysis, network marketing, product launch, product positioning, market share, advertising strategy, post-purchase perception, marketing, e-commerce, market research, relationship marketing in the HR area, maybe on training, skills, resourcing, organizational behavior, employer branding, glass ceiling effect, organizational development. You can work on a number of topics. You have listed. You can just glance it. You can skim through that or skip through that, and you will at least get some ideas on some of these. This is a very good trace, especially for commerce and management teachers. You can look at them, a number of these topics, right from finance also, marketing or HR, leasing, dividend policies, capital markets, derivatives, and pricing, futures and options, OTC derivatives, swaps, forward exchange contracts, and you can fundamental analysis you can do on bond valuation, technical analysis, a number of topics. If you go through that, you get a number of ideas. So I just want to kind of conclude at least by maybe that summarizing the whole thing. First, that I have given you some idea on. First, we started with the research process. So in the research process, we did say that a research actually contributes to development, because it's only through research that we've been able to answer unanswered questions and also solve unanswered problems. I also went through the process of research, that you should first have a problem in hand. Then once you have a problem in hand, you should survey the literature and identify research gaps, and then have developed the objectives. From the objectives, you must develop research questions. From the research questions, you should develop certain variables, and then you should collect the data by using some either a questionnaire or interview schedule or something. Then once you collect the data, then you have to analyze the data. Then once you analyze the data, you must produce the kind of report. And generally, any research report, it can be subject to variation depending on the university or purpose for which you are submitting the report. Generally about 5 chapters. First chapter, maybe you start with some theoretical introduction. You will have the theoretical framework of this particular chapter in about a certain number of pages, and then cover all the issues connected with that. And then second chapter, you're going to have the review of literature. I showed you that you start a little with the introduction, stating that your select problem, you're going to review some hundreds of studies that you have studied with reference to this, and review of literature. Every one study, half a page, in about 50 pages, about 100 studies you can review by quoting the author, the title, and the gist of the study. That forms your second chapter. In the third chapter, you're going to give the research design. I have given you what are the components of research design, from statement, problem, objectives, definition of concepts, scope, methodology, sampling, and tools and techniques for data collection, and how do you analyze the data, and how you prepare the report. So that's about the third chapter, research design. In the fourth chapter, you have to analyze the data in the fourth chapter, and every question that you ask is reduced some kind of a table. So you'll give the little introduction, table, and maybe graphs or charts can be used, and you'll explain the table and draw some inference. For every table, there must be an inference. And then that forms the fourth chapter. In the last chapter, you're going to summarize. Whatever you have analyzed in the fourth chapter, you will bring it into summary form, in bullet forms in the findings, first findings. Then you will give some conclusion about the whole at least study. Then you will offer some recommendations. Please mind you, well, your summary of findings must be as a result of your analysis. You should not bring some finding from somewhere else. You should ensure it is related to your objective, is related to your at least research questions, and then it must be related to your variables, and then only there should be a finding. So you can bring some at least findings of the study and conclusion, and then also suggest certain remedies or some model. And your recommendations must be very pragmatic. If you say that the college is not doing well, college must do well, it can't be a suggestion. You must say whether library has to improve, whether the faculty has to improve, whether the teaching methodology has to improve. It must be a concrete suggestion that you must make. Then You must also, after the end of 5 chapters, you give the bibliography. And even in the first chapter, few chapters, you must also give the citations. If you're taken for some piece of information, you should also cite at least the author, the title in the whatever format that we already said. And then you should give a bibliography at the end of the report, classifying that into books, journals, websites, reports, and so on in a particular order, either AP or MLA format. And then you should also enclose whatever at least that the questionnaire or interview schedule that you have thing and any other schedule that you have used. That forms your report. So this is the way we do. And I've also explained to you how to select a problem, how to review the literature also. This is the whole thing that I have covered today. And if you have any questions, you're most welcome.
Thank you, sir, for that very comprehensive session. I think each and every topic has been covered. We do have some questions which I will read out so that you could answer. There is one question from the previous session. Our participant has asked it many times, so I will just take that. Just a second. This was on, yes, can independent variable be dependent variable based on the study type?
Of course, that it is up to the researcher to classify them into dependent and independent. The thumb rule is, if a variable is it a impacting variable or getting impacted variable is a question. If it is going to impact other variables, it becomes a independent variable. If it is not going to impact, but is going to be impacted, then it becomes a dependent variable. That's a kind of thumb rule for classifying a variable into dependent and independent. If it's not going to change, it remains constant, it becomes independent. If it is going to change, it's a very variable itself, it keeps changing, then of course it becomes a dependent variable. That's what it is. So I gave you some examples of that. For instance, the maybe that the rate of, it depends on the study. If you're making a study on impact of employment on the GDP of the country, please mind you, employment becomes a independent variable, whereas GDP of the country becomes a dependent variable.
Thank you, sir. Next question is by Mr. Subhash. I think he's written it in a short form. So review of literature should be from general to specific, topic, background to supporting our studies. So should the review of literature be general to specific? Is there any format
Actually,
for that?
what happens in some studies, you may not get the specific literature at all. If they are new studies, if they're recent phenomenon, what happens, you may not get the related, the specific literature at all. In some maybe issues which are already done in-depth studies, you get a lot of kind of related literature. But related literature is not available, at least you must support that with the, if the specific literature is not available on a subject, then you must go for the related literature. If already sufficient specific literature is available, focus only on specific literature.
Thank you, sir. Next question is by Shobha Madam. Can we study on impact of social capital of bank employees on bank's performance?
Absolutely, you can. But you should define what is social capital. It's very important. What's the operational definition of your social capital? And it should not be misleading. It should be very specific. So the operational definition must be very, very clear as to what you mean by social capital in this context.
Okay, and of course, the chat is full of appreciation and accolades, sir.
Thank you.
It's difficult to spot the questions. Okay, there is one more. What is the difference between, okay, you've already covered, but still, since the question is here, what is the difference between research gap and research problem? We derive the problem from the gap, is it?
Once again, research problem is the, at least, issue, the main focus of the research as to what you really want to kind of work on. Whereas a research question is how you're going to kind of find solutions to this research problem. A research question is a split from the research problem. A research problem is very wider. The research problem is very wider. As we said, a research problem is that there is a lot of absenteeism in the online classes. That's a broader research problem. But the research question is that what is the attitude of these students towards online classes? Is it because of attitudinal problem that they are not attending? Number one. What are the reasons for attending the class? There are some students who are already attending. What is that they find interesting to attend these classes? And the last question is that what should be the strategy in order to ensure that there is attendance in the online classes? See, if you answer these questions, your statement of problem will be answered at least in total. So a problem is a broader picture, whereas research questions are kind of, maybe it's a split off from the statement of the problem.
You had put this in the illustration, that step-by-step illustration.
Yeah, of course, yes.
So again, ma'am, the link is there. Link will be shared, and you can refer to the whole talk today again, so that it will give you more clarity. Again, okay. Can independent variable be many and dependent variable only one?
It can be. It depends on your study. If it's only that, let us say, for income, focus is only on some income or employment, or maybe that population, one factor remains constant. But if you want to again split this independent variable into sub-variables, becomes more variables. That's all.
Okay.
It depends on the study.
Sorry, so you were saying something?
It depends on the study.
Okay, right. Next, we have a question from Sandesha sir. What is the best source to get theoretical background?
Theoretical background, of course, books, of course, will give you the theoretical construct, whereas articles, all that, of course, there are a lot of search engines available. Right now, I don't really have access to that. I can kind of send it if we want some kind of any specific, issue on which he wants a kind of.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I can kind of send it to you that,
sure.
What are the search engines for that? Yeah.
Sure, sir.
Okay, I think that is about it in the questions. And of course, sir, like I told you, a lot of thank yous and lot of appreciation in the chat box for you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you. And thank all the participants for their very kind of, interactive and also very patient listening for 3 hours. That's really kind of wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
And I also thank all our colleagues actually in the Mumbai College for really their active participation and showing a lot of interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
It's a good organization, very systematically and methodically organized.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to listen to you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks.
I would now like to call Assistant Professor Adya Bharti to give the formal vote of thanks. Adya ma'am, are you there?
Kindly make her co-host so that she can.
Okay. Okay, I am not able to do that. Dinesh, sir, is it possible to?
It's done.
Okay,
It's done.
Done. Yeah.
So curiosity keeps leading us down to new paths. A very good afternoon to one and all. On behalf of the Bansanga's SM Shetty College of Science, Commerce and Management Studies, I, Adya Bharti, Assistant Professor, deem it a great honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks. At first, I would express our profound gratitude towards Dr. S. Ramesh, distinguished speaker, for the in-depth session on research methodology, who have accepted our invitation and given generously their time. After today's session, we have learned to begin with the end in mind. It means to start a clear understanding of your destination and to always take the steps towards the right direction. I'm sure it has added content and deliberation. I would also like to thank our management, our principal, Dr. Sridhara Shetty, Vice Principal and IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Lichish Santosh, and Vice Principal Sandesha Shetty for supporting us. An event of the dimension involving so many participants from various places requires immense planning and preparation. I strongly believe that the participants have gained a lot from this session. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Adya ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I exit?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, sir.
For the participants, the next session will be at 2 o'clock, and the feedback and attendance link will be given at the end of that session. So